You were never meant to go farther than this house. My stepfather said that to me once, not as a warning but as a fact he believed about the world and my place inside it. My name is Tamsin Vale, and by the time he said it, he had already learned which parts of me to press to make me quiet. I lived with him and my mother in a narrow blue house at the edge of Amesbury, where the river runs like a ribbon someone forgot to tie. Our kitchen smelled like old coffee. The tile was cracked, and the clock near the back door made a sound that felt like the last seconds of something. Senior year moved like cold water. I kept my head down, took the later bus, worked at the hardware store on weekends, brought home bread, held my tongue. I studied on the floor of my room because the desk was too close to the door, and the door meant footsteps, and the footsteps meant questions I could not answer safely. All year I kept a secret hope folded small as a note, the kind you hide under a loose board. Harvard had sent me an early email asking for missing documents. The counselor said my file looked strong, that my community essay had made her cry. She had pressed a Kleenex into my hand and said she was proud. I kept that Kleenex in a book for a week, then felt silly and threw it away. In our house, the mail belonged to him. He met the carrier on the steps as if the letters were cattle, and he was the gate. My mother let it happen because letting things happen was how she kept the peace. He would sort the envelopes with his thumb, stack them on the table, and keep anything that looked like a bill higher than anything that looked like a dream. When he drank, he told long stories about his own youth, how he could have been a firefighter, a minor league pitcher, a man known by strangers. When he sobered, he required gratitude as a ritual. He had moved us into this house, he had fixed the gutter, he had replaced the porch light, he had taught me where I belonged. He said, "A girl without a father must learn her edges from the man who stands closest," and then he stood closer. I learned to memorize the shape of good news before it came, so the loss, if it arrived, would not erase me. I wrote ACT words on index cards, worked physics problems until my temples ached, and read the college forums in the school library because our home computer froze whenever a financial aid page loaded. At the library, quiet had rules and freedom. I liked the sound of pages turned by other people. On a Tuesday in March, the air held that late winter weight, the kind that makes hope feel expensive. I came home with a thin scarf around my throat and found him by the sink, drying his hands. He was smiling, slow and private, like someone who had tasted something sweet he had not paid for. "You're late," he said. "Bus was slow." He watched me cross the room, watched me open the fridge, and see the empty shelf where groceries might have sat. His eyes had that slick shine that meant they were warmed by a story only he knew. I felt a small shiver of awareness, the kind that isn't cold but still makes you want a sweater. That night, I lay awake listening to the clock, to the wind, to the past. A sentence kept knocking. "If anything big comes, it will not come to you." I pushed the thought away and counted the ways out of a small town. 26 letters for seasons, a river, a bus route. Somewhere in that count, the floorboard near my bedside, and I knew without knowing why that something had already arrived, and that someone had put it where I could not see. The weeks that followed grew narrow. My stepfather kept the mail tucked under his arm like a ledger. He told my mother she forgot things, that he would handle it, that we should be grateful he paid attention. My mother set down her tea and nodded, and gratitude became a coat we wore, even when it was too warm. At school, my friends talked about deposits, roommates, and campus tours. I learned to make my face move in ordinary ways, to nod where a nod would be enough. I told them a lie with soft edges, that my results were still pending. Someone asked about my essay, and I joked about commas. Another said her father was taking her to Boston for a tour and asked if I wanted to ride along. I said I had a shift at the hardware store. I said it easily. Later that day, I scrubbed paint off a customer's hand with mineral spirits and smiled because the man was kind and because the smell burned away the image of my stepfather by the sink. He had looked too pleased with nothing. I wondered what that nothing had been. Our guidance counselor, Mrs. Beltran, stopped me in the hallway. She had eyes that made you feel seen without being watched. "Anything yet, Tamsin?" "Not yet," I said. She studied my face for a heartbeat, then wrote a number on a small square of paper. "Here's the direct line to the Office of Financial Aid," she said. In case something gets tangled. Tangled, I repeated, as if the word belonged only to string or hair. That evening I found my mother darning a sock with careful stitches. She had been a nurse's aide before I was born, then a cashier, then a woman whose hands were always busy with small repairs. She looked up, her face sweet with worry. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm fine," I told her. "Just waiting." She set the sock aside and patted the couch. I sat, felt the cushion sag, and leaned into the shape she made for me. "You work so hard," she whispered. "No matter where you go, I'll be proud." My stepfather came in then, the smell of a cigarette trailing him. He glanced at us, not liking the closeness. "Proud of what?" he asked lightly, as if teasing, as if nothing had weight. "Of Tamsin," my mother said. He said. "We'll see." He turned the television on, louder than necessary. I watched the blue light wash his face, and thought of the way a river looks after a storm, how it seems calm if you don't know what the water is carrying. At night, the house became a map. I pictured the mailbox, the table, the drawer where he kept his papers. I saw the thin envelopes of bills and the heavier ones with raised seals. I imagined the sound an envelope makes when a letter is slid free, the sound of welcome, the sound of something longed for finally being named. My chest tightened like a fist. In the morning, he left early for a job that changed names monthly. I watched from the window as he backed the truck out, his arm thrown over the passenger seat, his mirror catching the weak sun. When he returned, he whistled, a tuneless sound that set my teeth on edge. He held nothing in his hands. On a Saturday, I walked to the river and stood on a flat rock, shoes damp, air sharp. Ducks cut little wakes in the gray water. I said nothing to them, and they said nothing back. Silence felt fair. I thought about the line he had once said, "You were never meant to go farther than this house," and I let the words pass through me without lodging. I understood something then, quiet and sure. I could not make him smaller. I could only refuse to make myself any smaller for him. When I turned to head home, the clouds opened a seam and brief light touched the water. It felt like a private oath, not spoken but held. I would keep my head, gather what was mine, and leave when the river did, steady, insistent, and without apology. The discovery arrived not as a shout but a whisper of paper. On Tuesday afternoon, the mail carrier left 2 stacks by mistake, ours and the neighbors, and I gathered both before the screen door slapped shut. The air smelled faintly of damp cardboard. I carried the letters to the table and sorted them quickly. A glossy catalog, a water bill, a charity appeal, a thin medical statement with my mother's name. Beneath them sat a heavy envelope the color of cream, addressed to me in a crisp serif font that made my fingertips prickle. The return address read Harvard College Office of Financial Aid. My breath stumbled, then steadied itself like a runner who finds her pace. I slipped the envelope into my backpack and returned the neighbor's mail with a wave, my body moving as if nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. In the library after school, I sat at a corner table and opened the letter with the carefulness of someone unwrapping a bandage. The page felt thick and kind. It named my admission as final and included a scholarship that covered tuition, room, and board. There was a line about merit, a line about need, and a line that said, "We are delighted to welcome you." A second sheet detailed the award, signed by a director whose name sounded like a bell. My hands shook, then stilled. I closed my eyes and saw our kitchen clock, my mother's careful stitches, the porch light my stepfather had installed as proof of his worth. I saw the way he met the mail at the door. A thought rose like a tide, unforced. If this letter had been sent once, it might have been sent before. If it had been sent before, someone had read it and held it back. I called the number Mrs. Beltran had given me, my thumb cold against the phone. A woman answered with a voice like well-made tea. When I asked if there had been earlier correspondence, she confirmed a packet had been mailed last week, with congratulations and award details. I thanked her, wrote the date on the back of my hand, and told her I looked forward to fall. Before I left, I printed the award letter from the student portal the way a person makes copies of a key before moving. I slid the pages into a clear folder and hid it between two sections of a reference book whose spine no one touched, the one about New England mills and migration. On my walk home, the wind lifted, small and playful. I passed Mrs. Doyle, the widow down the block, who was raking last year's leaves. She noticed the look on my face the way some people notice bird calls. "Good news?" she asked. "Very," I said, my voice steady. She leaned on her rake, kind and sharp at once. "Hold it close," she said. "Take it where it needs to go." At home, the kitchen was empty, but the drawer by the fridge had been opened and left a whisper off closed. Inside, under rubber bands and a small screwdriver, sat an empty envelope that matched the one in my backpack, cream and formal, my name sliced open at the top. My pulse softened into certainty. He had seen my future and tried to keep it from arriving. I slid the drawer shut and stood straight. The room looked the same, but it contained a new weather. I thought of the river rock under my shoes, of the seam of sun, of how a person knows when something right has found them, even if it comes late. I packed a small overnight bag, folded my work apron, tucked a photo of my mother and me at the county fair into my wallet, and walked to the corner where the bus stopped, because moving even a little was part of leaving. On the bus, I texted one person. "Can I come by?" I sent to Mrs. Beltran. "Door is open," she replied. At her kitchen table, she poured tea and waited. I took the letter from my backpack and laid it between us like a bridge. "He took the first one," I said. She read, jaw set, pride in her eyes like light through glass. "You're in," she said, "and they will pay you to be there." "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" "Leave," I answered, surprised by how simple the word felt. "Then we will help you leave well," she said. Together, we made a list. Call the housing office. Accept the award online. Get copies of my birth certificate and social security card from my mother, if she could. Arrange fall orientation travel. Say as little as necessary at home. Save the truth for where it would be safe. Resolve is a quiet thing. It sits at the base of the throat and keeps you speaking in complete sentences. Confrontation came 2 days later, not with a shout, but with a folded letter on the table. I set the cream envelope down between the salt shaker and the chipped sugar bowl. My stepfather walked in with the evening, his boots loud on the tile. My mother followed, her eyes a little tired. I stood where the light from the window softened my face. "What's that?" he asked. "My mail," I said. He glanced at my mother, then at me. "I told you to bring the mail to me." "I'm bringing this to me," I said. He laughed, short and hollow. "Kids and their big ideas." I lifted the letter and read a line aloud about full tuition awarded. I read the line about campus housing, about welcome, about the fall. The room stilled, as if the house had taken a breath to listen. My mother's hand found the back of a chair. She looked at me like she used to when I was 5 and ran in from the yard with a pine cone, proud, stunned, grateful, afraid to break the moment by holding it too tightly. He didn't look at the words. He looked at my composure and disliked it. "You're not going," he said. "It's too far. It's too expensive. You'll fail and crawl back here." He spoke with the deep certainty of men who have never tested their certainties. "It's paid for," I said gently. "With what?" he asked, as if money were a trick. "A scholarship," I answered. "One that arrived last week. One you opened." A small sound left my mother's throat. He turned to her, defensive by instinct. "I open all the mail," he said. "We agreed." "We did not agree to that," she said, her voice calm but new. "We let it happen." He looked at me again, measuring, searching for the old ways to make me small. He found that his hand could not reach. "You think you're better than this house," he said. "I think I'm the person this letter describes," I replied. My voice did not rise. There was nothing in me that wanted to win by volume. His mouth tightened. "You owe us," he said. "I owe my mother gratitude for every quiet sacrifice," I said. "I owe you nothing." He stepped forward. I did not step back. I put the letter down next to the sugar bowl, as if it were any paper, as if this moment were a routine thing. My calm bothered him more than anger would have. Enraged men know how to fight. They don't know how to stand inside silence. My mother moved between us with a cheap grace, as if crossing a field of glass. "Enough," she said to him, and the word held. He gestured at the counter, at the light, at the hallway, as if the house itself should join him. "This is my home," he insisted. "And mine," my mother said. "And hers." She placed her hand on my shoulder. The contact steadied my breath. He reached for the letter. I placed my palm on it. "Don't," I said quietly. He froze, surprised by the steel inside the one syllable. He let go. He wasn't used to being asked to let go of anything he wanted. He was a man who believed that wanting was proof of ownership. "You'll come crawling back," he said, but without heat, as if repeating a line that had been removed from the script. "If I do, it will not be to this door," I answered. He stared at me and saw that I meant it. He tried another angle. "What about your mother?" "My mother can visit me," I said. "My mother has her own life." My mother inhaled, small and bright, as if tasting freedom on the air. He looked from one to the other, found no permission in either, and turned away. He opened the fridge, found nothing he wanted, closed it, and left the room like a man who had wandered into the wrong house by mistake. The clock over the door resumed its measured confession. I stood very still and felt the blood in my wrist settle. Justice, when it arrives, is not a trumpet. It is a door that swings on a quiet hinge. I folded the letter, placed it back in its envelope, and slipped it into my backpack. My mother reached for my hand. Not for protection, not to be led, but because holding hands is what people do when the ground under them begins to feel steady again. August warmed the town until it smelled like cut grass and laundry lines. I spent the summer working double shifts, filing forms and sorting books I could not carry with me. I slept lightly and dreamed of bricks and trees, library lamps, and the sound of footsteps on stone. The days gathered like clean sheets stacked ready for use. When the morning came to leave, the sky was pale and open. The car we rented waited by the curb, modest and newer than anything our driveway had seen. My mother tucked a small plant into a cardboard cup holder for my dorm room, a pothose with leaves shaped like small, certain hearts. She had labeled the pot with my name in her even hand. On the porch, the clock had been taken down for battery replacement, and the space on the wall looked less like an absence than a possibility. He came out to the steps with a mug that did not belong to him, the one with the faded lighthouse. He stood with the stance of a man trying to look casual and failing. His face had a set to it that suggested he had prepared words he might not use. "Going then," he said. "I am," I replied. My mother stood next to me. She was not behind me, not in front, but exactly at my side. It looked right. He sipped his coffee and looked at the street. "Long way," he said. "All the good roads are long," I said. He nodded, a concession to a truth he did not love. "Best of luck," he said, as if the words weighed more than he wanted to carry. "Thank you," I said. We did not talk about mail. We did not talk about owing. We did not pretend a blessing that hadn't been given. The quiet was cleaner than any speech. We drove east, my mother and I, the morning thin and bright. She kept one hand on the wheel and one on the plant when it wobbled. We did not say much, because love does not always need sound to keep its shape. At a rest stop, she pressed a small envelope into my hand, heavy with folded bills and a note in her tidy script. For books, it said. For coffee. For breath on hard days. On campus, the air had that crosscurrent of nerves and hope that gathers where many beginnings meet. I carried my suitcase up the stairs, each step a quiet astonishment. Brick edges, green quads, the distant bell sounding the hour. In my room, the window framed a small tree. Sunlight lay across the floor like a promise kept. I set the pothose on the sill, where the leaves tested the light without fear. My mother hugged me, not long, not short, but exactly right. "Call when you can," she said. "I will," I answered. She pulled back and looked at me with a face she had worn when I first learned to tie my shoes. "You did this," she said. "You found your way." "We did this," I said and meant it. After she left, I stood alone in the room and listened to the sounds a campus makes, the muted music of drawers and laughter, the thud of boxes, the wheels of a rolling bin that needed oil. I pinned the scholarship letter inside a folder in my desk, not as proof to anyone, but as a record kept for myself. I opened a window and let new air in. Weeks softened into a rhythm. I learned the library's hours by heart, the quiet floors, the table near the third window that caught the last light. I read case studies and novels with margins like gardens. I joined a student group that worked with local high school seniors on applications. The first time a girl sat across from me and said she might be, not for college, I heard the old sentence from my stepfather, never meant to go farther, and felt it rise and evaporate like mist. One afternoon, I received a message from Mrs. Doyle, the widow with the rake. She had heard from my mother that I was well, that I had a view, that the plant was thriving. She had mailed a postcard with a watercolor of the river behind our houses. On the back she had written, "Hold it close, take it where it needs to go." I taped it above my desk, near a lamp that made a small circle of warm light at night. My stepfather called once, months later, to ask a practical question about paperwork for taxes, using a voice that kept slipping on its own caution. I answered what I could and said I had class. He said, "Right," and hung up. We did not talk about the old house or about what anyone owed. The first snow gathered on the quad like a new sheet on a bed. I watched students cross and leave lines behind them that the wind smoothed quickly. After my last exam, I walked to the river that runs past the campus. The water moved with winter's patience, steady and low, the banks trimmed with frost. I touched the bridge's railing and felt the metal bite, then ease. I thought of the river back home, and the flat rock and the small seam of sun that had appeared like a private oath. I understood that what I had done was not an escape, but a movement toward the life I had named for myself. In my room that evening, I watered the pot hose and wiped a film of dust from the window. The plant was longer now, tendrils reaching like a hand that knows what it is reaching for. I turned off the overhead light and let the lamp make its circle. The room was small, the world was big, and I belonged to both without apology. I took out a notebook and wrote a letter to the future in slow, neat lines. It said, "Choose dignity and keep walking." It said, "You will never regret the mornings you rose without anger." It said, "You do not have to win loudly to win." Then I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair, quiet settling around me like a familiar coat. Somewhere in the building, a kettle clicked off. A door closed without haste. The night outside had a calm that did not ask anyone to be less. Justice, I realized again, is mostly the absence of the wrong people's hands on your life. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.